get started with, I understand you were an artist, and maybe we could start with that in terms of how you began your art endeavor, career, your life.
Well, I didn't start as an artist. I started in the theater.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
I'm a graduate of the School of Performing Arts, and I decided that theater wasn't going to be the way I wanted to live my life. I wanted a more private life. I married a man who was a PhD in sociology, so I became a Harvard faculty wife at that time.
Okay.
And it wasn't until many years later when I realized that academe wasn't for me either. So that's when I met my second husband, and he was an author.
A writer, author of?
Books,
What
14
kind of?
books. He was Paris Flammonde, you may or may not know the name. He was one of the original Kennedy assassination critics.
Oh, interesting.
And we married, and then it was not until I went to business. I was in business for many, many years, because one of us had to earn the standard money.
Right.
And I felt that he was more talented than I.
Okay.
He wrote beautiful poetry, magnificent poetry, and has been published in 3 continents with his poetry. I started painting seriously when I was almost 50.
Right.
So I had no training, had no formal training.
Good for you.
But I realized that a creative life was something that I needed. When I abandoned the theater, I didn't really replace it with anything. And after 20 years, almost 25 years, I realized that it needed to be, my need for creativity had to be replaced.
Right.
And that's when I started to paint.
Wow, interesting. Good for you. Go back a little bit.
Sure.
You said you started in the theater. How old were you when you began that life?
Well, when I was 6 years old, I attended in Brooklyn, I attended a school called the Workmen's Circle. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. At that time, it was a socialist-oriented Jewish school that taught not Hebrew, but Yiddish. So I learned how to read, speak, and write Yiddish. The teacher of that school had been an actor on the Warsaw stage, and I was his protege. So from the time I was 6 until the time I was 11, I was his protege. And at that time, I started going to English classes, drama classes, and then I entered performing arts.
And
High school.
Performing arts, high school?
Yes, high school.
Okay, in New York City.
And yes.
Okay, and you're a graduate.
I'm a graduate, and I won the drama award when I was graduated.
Very good, very accomplished. And you grew up where? In Brooklyn?
Brooklyn.
Okay, where about?
East New York.
Okay. And you came from a traditional family?
A traditional, conservative Jewish family.
Okay. Siblings?
No,
Siblings?
no.
Okay, so you're only child.
One of a kind.
Okay, well that's good, you're unique.
One of a kind.
That's great. And so, did your parents have any involvement in the arts, or were
No.
they creative? Or,
None at all.
And were they encouraging?
They were very supportive. I've had very good parents.
So they supported you in your protege with
Oh, yeah.
being a protege of this particular man?
Yes, he was a very nice man.
What was his name?
His name was Joseph Blank.
And so when you did this art, the theater, you were in plays? You were
I did
productions,
summer
you were in-
stock. I did summer stock. I did radio as a child, off Broadway.
So you-
But by the time I was almost out of high school, that was when I met my first husband, and that's when I decided that I wasn't
You
going
said
to be
he
in the
was
theater.
in
that I wanted to
Harvard
work
or
on.
taught in Harvard?
I became a Harvard faculty wife
Yeah.
at the age of 19.
Was he significantly older than you at that time? Was he?
About 10 years.
Okay, so he was a little bit older. Okay, so you moved out of the area, moved
I
and started
moved
life
to Boston.
started a life in Boston, yeah. And how long were you in Boston?
About 3 years.
Okay, and then?
And then I left.
Did you left alone?
Alone.
Okay, so the Harvard wife was not something that was very nourishing for you or fulfilling?
There were aspects of it that were. I mean, I'm a big reader. I read a lot. And that was interesting, but the whole concept of publish or perish, which is, the academics will tell you this isn't essential. That attitude was something that I didn't care for. And I found that most of the academics whom I knew had only one track. They were schooled in only one area, and it was stultifying.
Yeah, it's confining.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, you needed to kind of...
I needed more. I needed to be with people who were more creative.
So where did you go?
To the village. Where did I go?
That was the place.
That's where I started.
That was the
That's
place.
where I started. And
in the village?
Yeah, that's where I started, and I just went back. As a matter of fact, I had met my husband before I left for Boston, my second husband.
Right.
And somehow I knew that was where I was going.
How did you meet him?
When I was about 14 years
that's
old, I was sitting in a cafe called the Rienzi in the village.
In the village?
Yes, it was one of the very, very early coffee houses. And I was with another friend of mine. She was about 13. We were sitting at a table having our orzata.
Right.
And at a table adjoining us, next to us, was a group of people. And a young man approached the table and started to speak to the people at the table. I never forgot him.
Really?
Never. He was gorgeous.
It took your breath away.
And brilliant.
So you were kind of
as I say,
watching.
when you say to me, I'm Tony, you know, I don't forget men.
Okay. Good for you. So
I remembered him, and then I guess it was almost over 10 years later when I encountered him again.
Where?
In the village.
In the village. And at that point, when you encountered him again?
Well, I encountered him again, but I was married.
Okay. But there was an introduction, a connection, a personal introduction, or just from afar?
Well, he saw me and I saw him, and that was enough.
Okay, that was it.
That was it.
Okay. So you relocated to the village.
Came back.
And did you live in the village?
Or yes.
Where did you live? I'm curious.
I lived on Jane Street.
Okay, yeah. And what year was this? 1960?
When I moved back, it was 1962 or 3, I don't remember. We weren't married until 65.
Okay.
But I was home for a couple of years before I actually started a relationship with him. Right. Because I knew that there was no way he could support me. Right. So I had to decide whether or not he was worth my supporting him.
Right.
And I decided he was.
So you went for it.
So I did.
For you. So it sounds like you've lived a life, from what I'm hearing, in which you had the courage to make significant changes from the way your life was going.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I haven't even gone into all the details of my first marriage.
Something tells me we're going to need a lot more time. I don't know. We only have an hour. We have to do 2 interviews. I don't know.
There's no way an hour will do it.
I'm sure.
No way.
I'm sure. So you moved to the village. You live with Mr. Flammonde.
Not until we got married.
Okay.
No, we had a relationship, but we didn't live together.
Okay, and then you stayed in the village when
yes,
you were married?
He lived on West 12th Street.
Okay.
And we got married, and I moved into West 12th Street with him. And we were there for 7 years before we moved to the Poconos.
So you were in the village at a time when the Beat Generation was Ginsberg around, were there those kind of coffee houses, Jack Kerouac, the Beats,
And we were there
William
before
Burroughs,
then.
you were
We
there
were there
before
before
them.
then, yeah.
Okay, okay. So it was a very emerging.
It was when the village was the village.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you went through all that, you
Oh, yeah.
experienced all that.
Oh, yeah.
Incredible, yeah. So then you left
My
there. Why did you
husband
leave there and come to
was
the
not
Philippines?
well. And the doctor said to me, the stress of living in Manhattan was too much. Get him out of here.
Really?
So we had friends here. Actually, my husband's first wife and her second husband lived here. And we were friends of theirs.
Okay.
And we came to visit them. And I really wanted to stay because I knew that it would be better for him. And so at that time, I was a secretary at that time. And secretaries in this area, executive secretaries, were making about $60 or $65 a week. So my husband said he didn't want to move from New York. And he said, well, if you can get a job for over $100, we'll move. So I went around.
Something tells me you accomplished that. Yeah.
I did it.
You were
Yes,
determined. Yeah, very determined.
I got a job with Dowden, Hutchinson, and Ross. They were the first local publishers to set up business. They didn't have their office set up yet. And I went to a bank. It was the Northern Bank, Northeastern Bank. It was on Main Street at that time. It doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And I spoke to the vice president and I said, I have to have a job. Please direct me to some place that will pay me enough to stay here.
Right.
And he suggested these people who had not set up their offices yet. And I went to them and they hired me as an office manager for $120.
So you topped it, right?
Right.
Good for you.
But he didn't speak to me for years. but he got better and he lived to 86. So it was not bad.
Wow, very good. So you took care of him. Yeah, what was his first name?
Paris.
Paris.
Flammonde.
Wow. So you had a life with Paris for many
Wonderful.
years?
Almost 50 years.
50 years. Very nice. And when did he pass away?
2 years ago.
2 years ago, so it's relatively recent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Children? No children?
No.
Okay. Your parents, it's interesting. I'm always curious to know, what was your experience of them when you came back from Harvard, Boston area, left that husband, and then soon thereafter said, guess what? I'm living with Paris, and we're getting married, and we're going to live in the village.
Well, when I came back, my father said, you're not going to do that again, are you?
Meaning?
You're not going to go off and marry somebody who is not what we expected.
What did they expect?
Well, my first husband was black.
They didn't expect that.
No.
Okay.
You might say I was 60 years ahead of my time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you were the original guest who's coming home to dinner.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so they said, you're not going to do that again, are you? And I said, look, just understand this. I will marry whom I want, not who you want. That was it. Just get used to it.
Yeah. So you drew a line.
Oh, yeah.
Very early.
Oh, yeah.
With them and said.
Even earlier than that.
Yeah. 13, 14 in the village, yeah, I'm sure you did. So you've had this independent, streak in you.
I'm a tough cookie.
Yeah, your whole life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they knew that they were not going to control you.
Well, Paris was somebody, my first husband was an extremely easy man to like. Very nice
What was
man.
his first name?
James.
James.
And came from a wonderful family from the South, all well-educated. The only thing that they could ever find against him was his color, because he was a wonderful man. My second husband was very hard to get to know.
More private kind of.
Much more private, came from, how can I say it? A long line of very intelligent, educated people with a, what do you call a family tree, hundreds and hundreds of years, total different background from mine.
From where did they originate from?
England and Ireland.
Okay.
And was very, very difficult. My father died early on, but my mother was the one that had to deal with my new husband. And they were people who were at total ends of a continuum, totally different. But because of me, they were both very, very civil to each other and treated each other nicely for all of the years that we were married.
How was Mom
She
different?
was from Brooklyn. Her people were from Ukraine.
Okay, Eastern European.
My father was, but she was born here. My
Right.
father was born in, was Russian, but he was born in Romania.
Okay.
My father didn't live long enough to really get to know my husband. My father was very, very easy to get along with. My mother, on the other hand, was more difficult, somewhat manipulative.
Okay.
And Paris wouldn't tolerate that of her or of me or of anyone. Very, very strong. So that was difficult.
But it worked somehow for you.
They did it for me. Oh yeah.
So out of their love for you, they were able to.
I was very fortunate. I had very loving parents, even though we didn't always see eye to eye on things. But they always tried to be supportive of me.
So you lived with Paris. You moved out here.
We moved here in 1971.
Okay.
We bought a home in East Stroudsburg. We lived there for 10 years. And then, but all of that time was very, very difficult for me to make enough money out here to maintain us. So finally, I made arrangements with my mother for me to travel into New York, get a job in New York, work there, live with her during the week, and come home on weekends.
Right.
I did that for about a year and a half. It was very, very difficult.
Yeah, it's tough, very stressful.
Very stressful. And then, when the buses started running more frequently, I got a job and commuted on a daily basis for 3.5 years to New York.
Not easy.
So I had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning because at that time, they didn't have a lot of buses going into New York. There was one, maybe sometimes two. So that if one wanted to get onto the bus and get a seat, one had to mark one's place in a line outside the bus terminal. And so I had to get up at 3 so I could get there at 4 so I could mark my, and that's what I had to do for 3.5 years. I did that for 3.5 years. And then when I came home at night, I didn't get home until 7. And then I had to cook.
Paris wasn't about cooking.
No.
He wasn't over the stove.
No, he was waiting for the cocktail to be poured.
Okay. So you were double duty there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you were you confronted this kind of adversity and were very persistent.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, when I was about 50, I decided it was enough. It was enough, and I came back to the Poconos, and I couldn't find work very easily. Finally, I did get a job as the secretary to the manager of Poquemont Resort. Believe it or not, that was the most stressful job that I had. I held that job for 5 years.
Stressful in what way? Just interpersonally?
He was an old-fashioned employer who thought that people who worked for him should get him his lunch and his sodas, and it was difficult.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's just so contrary to who you
right,
are.
but I had to keep that job because we had no other way to survive. So
was Paris writing? Was he?
Oh, he wrote 14 books. But
did he derive any income from it? Did he?
Not very much. He could do almost anything in this world, but make money. It was his whole background was antithetical to money making. He came from a background where people didn't talk about money. I don't know if you can understand that.
Yeah, I can relate to that, yeah.
But anyway, so but he was highly respected in his field.
Right.
And when I was about 55, I'd had enough of working. And so I went into the antiques business and became an antique dealer.
Wow. And you'd had no prior experience, no education?
No.
Good
No.
for you. So you've taken risks. You keep taking risks.
I worked at, what's the name of the place over across from ShopRite?
Oh, yeah,
See, this is when you were
yes,
older.
yeah, right. I know the place you're talking
Okay,
about.
I worked there with Bill Douglas for 2 years, and then I moved and went to Pocono Peddler's Village, where I stayed for 8 years.
Okay. And you purchased antiques, you sold
purchased antiques, and it was interesting because I had very little money to buy antiques, so that I had to be much more perspicacious than somebody else. I had to buy the right things very low and be able to make profit.
And you did.
And I did.
You were successful at that as well.
Yeah.
So each endeavor that you embarked upon, you made it work.
Yeah.
Whether it was a $120 job in the Pocono so you can move out here versus...
Whatever it was.
Yeah.
I'm a survivor.
Yeah. But when did the painting begin? Because
Okay, well, when we first moved out here, I got a job at Brookdale on the Lake, which was, and the Danish family owned it at that time. They were the ones who sold it to Caesars. And I worked for him for 2 years as his front desk manager. And it was a long day, it was a 12-hour day. But in the middle of the day were 3 hours where I had no work. And during that time, I started to draw.
You just decided you were going to start to draw.
Right. And so by the time I was finished with that job, I was already interested in painting.
What kind of, was it oil? Was it or just...
When I started with oil. And when I realized that I wanted to paint, I realized that if I was going to be competitive at all, I had to learn a lot because I had no background. So I became almost obsessive compulsive about it.
You went in, you dived in.
That's right.
All blinders.
That's right. My husband almost threw me out because all I did was paint. Paint. Finally, after a number of years, I realized I had reached a point where I could relax a little bit. I started with oils, and I also...
You felt more confident in yourself and
I
your
felt more
abilities.
confident. I didn't have to, and I had to discover who I was as a painter. And I realized that essentially I'm a portraitist. That's where I'm most comfortable. Because I like people, and I like dealing with people, and I love faces.
That's great. And that's where you, that was your niche.
Right, and I started in oils, but I realized that oils were too slow and medium for me. So I switched to acrylics, and I'm much more comfortable in acrylics.
And that's what you stayed with all this?
Well,
you ventured
before
out.
my husband died a couple of years before, he wanted me to try oils again. He was a traditionalist, and he thought, oils were traditional. So I went back and I tried, and I could paint in oils, and I did a couple of paintings of him in oil. But I'm still more comfortable, and now I'm back into acrylics.
Good for you. So it's been an interesting journey.
So far.
Yeah.
I'm not finished.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Do you have thoughts about where you want to go with the time left, and however much time that is?
Well, my mother lived till 90, and my health is better. I don't take any medicines at all, and I work out on a treadmill every day,
Good for you.
and my doctor says, check in with me once or twice a year. So I do.
It's all good.
Yeah.
So you may
So-
live to 120.
Well, if
God
it's,
bless.
if it's possible, you see, fortunately, I don't have to know where I'm going because I just enjoy every day anyway.
Yeah, you enjoy where you're at.
I love to cook, I love to eat, I love to drink wine. Nobody there to do it with me, I'll do it myself. But I do have a lot of friends.
Yeah,
I have friends.
Yeah, yeah. So you're content to keep doing what you're doing, painting,
Yeah,
socializing,
yeah.
living your life every day to the fullest that you can, and that's good enough.
Well, it's not totally good enough. I mean, there are certain aspects of being young that
You miss?
I miss.
Sure.
Yeah.
For instance.
For instance, having a boyfriend, having sex.
Okay, sure,
You know?
sure, sure.
And I'm still alive.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, you're very alive.
And so many of the men that I run into who would be at my age level
Right.
are totally non-functional or they're already dead. So, you know.
So that makes it tough.
Right,
Yeah.
and also, even the ones that are functional are so locked into their set patterns. I mean, you know, they don't drink a cocktail till 3, and it's got to have a certain number of ice cubes, that kind of thing.
Right.
I've run into
Very
that.
rigid.
I've run into that, yeah.
Yeah.
That's not for me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So there are things that you miss
Oh, yeah.
that you'd like to have in your life.
I would, but
but
fortunately, I have friends. I have
Yeah.
my friend John, who I can rely on
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a very fulfilling life despite.
I do. I'm very fortunate. I
Yeah.
have good friends. I have a wonderful place to live. When I knew my husband wouldn't be around anymore, I realized that there was no way that I could financially maintain the house. It just couldn't be done. Because when we were together, we had 2 incomes, 2 social securities. I just couldn't do it. So I decided that I had an option to sell the house I had a wonderful property, 3 1/3 acres with a stream and a pond in an excellent location. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I also had a real estate license.
Somehow it doesn't surprise me. Good for you.
And I knew that I could sell the house, but then if I sold it, I've had to buy another house, and that would have put me in a similar situation. So I decided to give my house to friends.
You gave your house to friends?
I gave the house to friends with an understanding, legally,
Right.
that they would see that I had a portion of the house to live for the rest of my life, without cost.
So you were creative in your
My retirement.
Yeah, your retirement. You had a problem and you came up with a very creative solution. You had good friends that you trusted.
That's right.
That you can do
Oh,
that.
yes.
Good for you. Good for you.
I'm very happy.
So you're secure in that?
I'm secure. I have a wonderful place to live. I'm still in my house.
Right. If you were to give or try to impart some prescription for a younger audience who may be watching this as to how, what is it that's important in life? What is it that you view as something that you can share with them that they could hold on to and use going forward in their life? What would that be?
Well, they'd have to go back and have my mother's genes. That helps. If you have good genes,
Okay.
you have
Yeah.
health.
Yeah, health is important.
Health.
Take care of yourself.
There is nothing more important.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Health. Yeah.
That's one thing
Don't
that.
neglect your health either.
That's
I
one
imagine.
thing that I could never get my husband to do. That was to walk. He thought walking from the armchair to the computer
Was a
was
walk.
exercise. And he would always say, well, next spring. You know, couldn't get him to do it. That's very, very important. what you eat,
It's also important. It's part of your health.
very, very important. People just put anything into themselves. You just can't do it.
And expect to have good
And
results.
you can't. You have to eat properly, you have to exercise. Now, as far as wisdom is concerned, that's very hard. I don't know that I'm particularly wise.
Well, I think you are, maybe more than you realize, because as the little time we've spent together here, what I'm hearing is that when you realized in your life that there was a sense of discontent or unhappiness or dissatisfaction, you had the courage
Oh, yes.
to change.
One
Make,
has to.
make significant radical changes.
Yes, I think that is something that's essential. That is essential.
Yeah, and you did it in a time as a young woman where you really bucked the time, so to speak,
Oh, yes.
the culture and the expectations of women in particular. So as a woman, you, to me, I mean, my God, you're incredible in the sense that you had the courage to really, I'm not staying in this. And this was in the 60s and...
One has to have self-respect.
Yeah.
That's essential.
Yeah.
And no one else is going to make you happy. You have to do it yourself.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I mean,
Well, thank you for having
this
me.
has been great. I've enjoyed...
When are we getting together again?
I don't know. We'll have to talk after this. We'll see. Thank you very much. It was very nice
My
meeting you.
pleasure.